this one right here, the lore of Elden Ring's bosses. Let's get started.
Where do you go after death? What is the right way to die? Can death be overcome? And if it can, what are the consequences of such a thing?
Yeah, I think we've already watched a theory video about it, that our life tries to return to the Erdtree, but yeah, that was just theory, and we don't know.
These questions are at the very heart of Elden Ring's story, and in order to answer them, I want to go over a set of bosses that are defined by their relationship to death, those being the Deathbirds, the Ancestral Spirits, the Tibia Mariners, the Godskins, the Burial Watchdogs, and the Black Knife Assassins.
Okay, I already know lore about the Burial Watchdogs and the Godskins here, but never knew those ship dudes, like, for real. The design is just so absurd. I don't know shit about the Deathbirds, but the Ancestral Spirits one, I'm pretty interested in that one. Like, I love the theme. I think, in my opinion, this was the most, the best designed boss fight in Elden Ring from a thematic standpoint, because it just had a completely different feeling, man. That was truly insane. You need to look up the music for that one. Both phases of a boss fight. It sounds so good.
Understanding these bosses will teach you so much. In Elden Ring, one's self is separated into two distinct entities. There's the body, which is one's physical self or corporeal flesh, and then there's the spirit, which is essentially the soul that commonly persists after death. In the age of the Erdtree, the bodies of the dead and their spirits are returned to the Erdtree. This is done via a process.
Oh, so this is not a theory, this is really true, or what? What I said.
It's called Erdtree burial, where great tree roots in catacomb dungeons absorb the dead, so that they might be immortalized with the Erdtree.
Yeah, in every catacomb when we went to the boss fight and slaughtered that bait, because after a while they all become easy. It is what it is. This game is not really hard if you are really looking into it, except some exceptions like Millennia, but that doesn't matter. But yeah, we already, every time we went to these catacombs, there was like this big mountain of like dead people in the boss room land. And that was the reasoning behind that. Or all the corpses, at least, in the catacombs. They all connect to the Erdtree, I guess. Because the roots reach.
But it was not always this way.
The roots.
In fact, the entire culture of death had a different shape in the earlier days of the Lands Between. Back then, instead of Erdtree burial, death commonly burned in ghost flame. Ghost flame, also known as spirit flame, is a cold, white flame that is created when bones are burned to ash. We learn this from
that's how we get the cold effect from it.
The fallen hawks who prowl the underground rivers. When the last embers of their torches were used up, they were forced to burn the bones of their fellows instead, and acquired the cold ghost flame. This process appears to help separate the spirit from the body. And while a lot of these spirits appear to be vengeful based on the ghost flame spells, I think, in general, having the body separated from the spirit in this way would have been a desired outcome. I speculate that we see proof of this even in the current age, where the wandering dead at Agheel Lake gaze at the sky, praying that the dragon Agheel might burn them to ash. Perhaps this was simply the acceptable way to put a tired body to rest.
Okay.
The keepers of Ghost Flame were the Deathbirds, who tended to the flame in their graveyards, raking out the ashen remains of the dead from their kilns. So I like to think of the Deathbirds as serving the old process of death, and delivering death by reducing bodies to ash so that spirits might be better able to move on. Now, admittedly, a lot of these spirits are vengeful, and that's how Ghost Flame is sort of weaponized by the Deathbirds and sorcerers. But I do think that...
Yeah, those attack patterns are pretty annoying, but sometimes those Deathbird just fell off a cliff. Like, it happened like 3 times to me, and that was hilarious, man. We just died of fall damage.
At its core, Ghost Flame was important just because it separated the body and the spirit. After all, the explosive Ghost Flame sorcery compares this process of death to the Erdtree's process of death, which was pretty all-encompassing, so I think it's safe to assume that Ghost Flame was just really important to the process of death, and it was more than just, vengeful spirits and a weapon to be used. And next we should talk about the Twin Bird, which was the mother of the Deathbirds. We don't find this creature in-game, but we can find its likeness painted vividly upon a...
Could come in the DLC. hopefully.
Kite shield that one of the deathbirds drops.
I'm hyped for that one.
The design might remind you of a phoenix, which is traditionally drawn with bright colours and a crest of feathers and a longish neck. Of course, the phoenix is a creature that rises from the ash when it dies, which is obviously extremely fitting for this story.
Bro, I would love to fight more majestic beings and not ones which are so depressing. Like in every Souls game, like all these bosses, they have some depressing backstory. They look pretty depressed, and yeah, it always feels sad to strike them down. Except the snake dude from Volcano Mania, he seemed pretty crazy, but yeah.
So the kite.
Okay, come on. Yeah, all the stories were depressing. Yeah.
Shield tells us that the twin bird, or this phoenix creature, is said to be the mother of the deathbirds. But not only that.
Damn! Imagine fighting a phoenix in the DLC. It would be so insane. So many annoying mechanics which I can think of. Holy shit! But it would be worth it just to see that fucking phoenix fly down and trying to catch you, man, on a, especially on the top of a mountain. That would be badass, like some Dark Souls 2-esque thematic DLC. That would be insane. But yeah, we already got that in Azula. Yeah, it would be hard.
It's also called the envoy of an outer god. So we can kind of compare the twin bird to the two fingers, then, who are also envoys to an outer god. They are envoys to the greater will, and similarly, I assume the twin bird probably communes with some outer god of death. And while we're definitely left wondering what greater purpose this outer god might have, the mere fact that it exists lends a lot of significance to the twin bird and its deathbirds as well.
Yeah.
A variation on the deathbird is the death right bird, which is an alternate boss, and it's a far more threatening foe, as it actually seems to use
those wings, man. I love that shit.
Power that it's gained from certain spirits and ghost flame. And if you look really closely at its ethereal wings, you might even spy little spirits lurking within. And when I saw these, I was really excited because I recognized the weapon they're using, and the weapon explains who they are. They're holding
those fucking spears, man. This move was so annoying. I died like 10 times to that shit.
Little death ritual spear, and that item reads, "The priests became the guardians of the birds through the rite of death, which is a part of their contract for a far-off resurrection." So deathbirds have a lot to do with sacrificial rites. You know, they don't just attend to the ghost flame, they also deliver death, and they also perform rites of death. So we can assume that these priests were sacrificed in a rite of death so that they could lend a sort of spiritual strength to the deathbirds.
Yeah, just to upgrade them, they sacrificed themselves. Worth it, man. To get a 10-minute longer boss fight than against the normal birds, I guess.
But we're still left wondering about the nature of their contract with the deathbirds, which promises a far-off resurrection for them. You know, what agreement did these priests come to with the deathbirds? I wonder what has to happen for their contract to be fulfilled, and how will they even be resurrected?
I love the design.
In terms of where the deathbirds appear, they kind of appear everywhere, and I think that might be a hint that their influence was once present far and wide. And while their importance in the current age is likely quite diminished, they still definitely are relevant in the lands between. In fact, many other enemies actually make reference to them, and some even successfully channel their powers. Even Ghostflame lights the way in catacomb dungeons to this day. But in general, there is a lot of power that can be gained from death in the lands between, which brings us to the ancestral spirit.
Let's go.
In the flourishing landscapes underneath the lands between, you would have found the bodies of 3 large stags enshrined by the ancestral followers. These warriors, hunters, and shamans believe heavily in the principle that life sprouts from birth, but also from death. I think this principle is sort of represented by horns, because in real life, horns continue to grow throughout the lifespans of animals, with their primary function usually being to convey a social hierarchy. And here, the largest and most influential creature is a giant stag. And in the world of Elden Ring, since life continues after death, it makes sense then that this creature's antlers continue to bud and grow even after its death. We learn this from defeating the regal ancestor spirit.
This was amazing, man.
Looking at the horn of this fallen king.
It wasn't even a hard boss fight, but it was so majestic, man. Holy shit.
New growths bud, glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. Long-lived beasts like this are worshipped by the ancestral followers, a race of beings who keep their distance from the Erdtree and are just content to await new buds and new growth. If a being does not show signs of budding horns or new growth, then they are sacrificed with an axe called the Winged Greathorn. Interestingly, the twin blades of this sacrificial axe are called Envoy's Wings, which might be a reference to the twin bird we mentioned earlier, which was also
I don't think so.
a winged envoy. According to the horn charm talismans, the ancestral spirits specifically arise from long-lived beasts, and I think this touches on another commonly repeated theme in Elden Ring, which is that there are benefits to living life to its fullest potential. To quote some more Deathbird items, the most glorious end awaits those who cling tenaciously to life, and it is important to render up a death worth offering. Those who lived a heroic life were even able to go on and see a unique version of grace in the afterlife. We currently
that grace looked pretty dope.
think that this grace is red, and that these are the same red rays of grace that you might have noticed when you first explored the Forbidden Lands. So this might be the most intriguing part of the video. Let me explain. Past the Forbidden Lands and deep within the consecrated snowfields is a Tibia Mariner. And this one drops Helphen Steeple, a greatsword that reveals just a mind-blowing amount of lore for one item. First, it reads, "Greatsword patterned after the black steeple of the helphen, the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world." So the word steeple is commonly used to describe the tall spire found on churches, and indeed the design of Helphen's steeple echoes that of the Morion blade from Dark Souls, which also referenced the spire of a church. However, while I think Helphen is likely to be a sort of church, I don't think it's a building. Instead, this item seems to be describing the shape of a black tree in the spirit world, a so-called lampwood.
The dead trees kinda look like that, I guess.
Or lamplight tree that serves as a guidepost for the heroic dead. The item goes on to say that lamplight is similar to grace in appearance, and it is said that it can only be seen by heroic spirits or those who met their death in battle. So the black tree of Helphen is almost like this dark mirror of the Erdtree, but in the spirit world. It's so interesting that it even gives off its own guidance of grace, and there's a few reasons we speculate that this grace might be red. First, a red gem can be found at the very tip of Helphen's
But why does it glow? Like, is some power behind it? I wanna know.
steeple, and a gem on the rolled medallion as well. Plus there's a red glow visible from the sword's gem and a red glow from the rolled medallion when you hold it up at the Grand Lift, where it takes you to the Forbidden Lands, where we speculate that you can briefly glimpse this lamplight or red grace filtering between the trees. So you might be asking, why can we see the grace when we're not dead? But technically tarnished are defined as the dead who yet live, so it might make some sense that we can see it. The next question is, where does the lamplight lead? And I think there's two options. One is that the lamplight might lead back to Helphen itself. That is the source of the light after all, and Helphen's steeple can be enwreathed in ghost flames, so maybe the dead are sort of put to rest here. Alternatively though, I guess it's also possible that the lamplight has plans for the heroic dead, just like grace has plans for the tarnished. It might lead them somewhere else as well. We just don't know. In my discussions with Quelaag, who helped with these theories, she pointed out the similarities that Helphen has with Valhalla of Nordic folklore. If you don't know, Valhalla is a place where brave spirits would be invited to dine with the gods. And it seems that Helphen is inspired by that same sort of folklore, since only heroic spirits can see the light. Not to mention Hell, with one L, is
actually warriors who died in battle only went there. Like, that's the reasoning behind it, or what?
the name of the world of the dead in Nordic folklore. And speaking of folklore, this finally brings us back to the Tibia Mariner, the boss that dropped Helphen's steeple in the first.
What is this design? When I first saw this thing, I was thinking, bro, what did they smoke to create this dude, man? He's in a ship, like, and using this instrument.
The Tibia Mariners themselves actually have no written lore to speak of, which is kind of a shame. But what they do have is an incredible visual design, and it kind of carries them from a lore perspective, because this visual design is steeped very heavily in appropriate folklore. So, in Greek mythology, there is a stretch of water called the River Styx, which marks the boundary between Earth and the underworld. And to help souls of the deceased cross this river, you have to find the river boatman and pay him to safely take you across. Just so, I kind of imagine the dead in Elden Ring are being drawn to the Tibia Mariner in a similar fashion. You know, he has a purple lantern and a loud horn, and he might offer a similar sort of guidance to the underworld. There is one spell that references this boss briefly. It's Tibia's Summons, and it says, "For time immemorial, the dead have been those who are lost and require guidance and leadership."
Okay, that's a clear reference to that. This truly explains it.
Suffice to say, death was a very important facet of life in the Lands Between, even for the gods at one point. Which brings us to the Godskins, an order of apostles that were born to
This
deliver...
doesn't make... Okay, sorry. But the lore is great, but the boss fight isn't at all. Like, you know the synergy between Onsen and Smo? It was that Onsen is the fast dude, and Smo was the slower one. So you had this synergy between them. But these two fuckers, they are both fast, and they both use a fucking spell which triggers when you use some usable item. Like, it's not great. It's not great design. There are hard boss fights which have great design, but this is just a fuck you boss fight. Like to tilt you a bit more, but I can kind of understand that. It is what it is.
The destined deaths to the gods long ago. I kind of like to think of them as a counterbalancing force to the influence of gods, wielding sharp tools for boring and slicing through flesh, and incanting spells that mocked the wrath of the gods. It seems these godskins actually succeeded in hunting many gods, if their name is to be believed. Their robes were made by sewing together patches of smooth skin, and the nobles' robes include subcutaneous fat, which makes them plump and soft. Known for their 7-faced aprons, these nobles are the most ancient apostles, and they're deeply inhuman. Their weapon is not a slicer, but a stitcher, and they wield it with a skill that is unmatched by any lowborn. These beings were elevated to a social class above the lowborn because they served a queen, a glowmide queen. The black flames they wield are actually channeled from that queen's greatsword, and it was this queen who raised them from birth in the first place, cradling her newborn apostles in godskin cloth, so that they might grow to become the death of the gods. This glowmide queen was powerful, but what makes her character so important is that she was also...
DLC! There can be something DLC, man. I'm so hyped. Like, there's so much potential right here. So much fucking potential, and they need to fix the PvP, but that's something for another video.
So, an Empyrean chosen by the
It's
fingers.
going to be hype.
Now, remember, an Empyrean is a candidate chosen by the two fingers to become a god. So, despite being such a dark character, the Glowmide Queen was still a valid choice for godhood. And all of this, of course, was before the Rune of Death had been removed from the Elden Ring, and it was from this Rune of Death that the Black Flame originally got its power. We only know of one other Empyrean alive at this time, and that would have been Queen Marika. Naturally, at some point, Marika and the Glowmide Queen clashed. Though, according to the Godslayer Greatsword description, we know that the Glowmide Queen was defeated by Malekith, who was the shadow of Queen Marika. He is credited with defeating the Glowmide Queen and the Apostles, and sealing off the Rune of Death.
That boss set, man, it was so fucking epic. It was hard, but holy shit, that was worth it. It was fun. Also, like, I don't know, how long did it took me? Can't remember. But it's not on the same level as Gale, but it's pretty high up there. I can guarantee you that one.
Which, again, was the source of their power. What's not clear to me about all of this, though, is whether Marika and the Glowmide Queen were rival Empyreans competing for godhood, or if Marika was already a god and decided to take out the Glowmide Queen because the Glowmide Queen was an Empyrean threat to her age. But at any rate, it seems like Marika and the Glowmide Queen are opposites. You know, the Glowmide Queen ends ages, but Marika wished for an age eternal, so it makes sense that they'd clash. There's still so much we don't know about them. But after all of this, Marika's Age of the Erdtree began, and during this age, you were supposed to wait for the roots of the Erdtree to call to you, so that your spirit could return to the Erdtree, after death to be immortalized with it. Specifically, these roots were found in catacomb dungeons, and there's even a statue found across the lands between that was designed to help people find these catacomb dungeons. This is the statue of Rhosis, the Usher of Death, and he shows the dead the path towards catacomb dungeons.
Bro, to be honest, this looks like shit he's holding in his hands. Come on.
The catacombs themselves were built
like
in the age of the Erdtree. This is proven by root resin, which states that the roots here were once linked to the Erdtree, and it was for this reason.
Once? Aren't they still connected to the Erdtree? Once.
Catacombs were constructed around these great tree roots. So at this point in history, Queen Marika had implemented her new concept for death in the lands between, and in her eyes, a proper death meant returning to the Erdtree. Thus, in the days where catacomb roots were connected to the Erdtree, these catacombs were valid sites of Erdtree burial. And I think we literally see this taking place, as corpses can be seen being absorbed.
That's why everything is fucked up right now.
Absorbed by the roots at the end of every catacomb dungeon. The process of Erdtree burial, though, is described as an honor reserved for heroes, and this process of Erdtree burial is presided over by Erdtree burial watchdogs, who protect the catacombs with their impish servants. These creatures...
Fuck those Sims. Holy shit. Like, I thought in Dark Souls 3 that those fuckers were annoying, but they are on a different level of annoyingness. It's insane. But, damn, I want to have my slave head back. Like, in Dark Souls 3, you always went with a slave mask if you went into PvP. That was so fucking fun, just to troll your opponent. PvP was 10 times better in Dark Souls 3, but holy shit, those fuckers. Are
golems, and I think that they might have been created specifically during the period of history where Liurnia had an allegiance with Leyndell, since they serve the process of Erdtree burial, but their weapons actually have glintstone embedded in them. Furthermore, when hit by impure crystal darts, they malfunction, which I think is further proof of their glintstone origins. In some catacombs and graveyards, the physical bodies of the dead have begun to rise. Now, these beings are defined as those who live in death, and they are a relatively recent phenomenon in the lands between. Instead of having their body and spirit return to the Erdtree, they rise in an act that is completely
yeah, because where should the soul go? Like, there's no place, I guess.
With Marika's concept of death, Erdtree burial, and the Golden Order. I'll go into more detail on this later when we talk about Godwin, but basically, this all began when Ranni stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, and then she imparted its power onto the knives of the Black Knife Assassins. You can tell the assassins have quite a lot of secrets in their lore.
Also annoying.
We do know a few things, though. We know that they're all women, they're all Newman, and they have links to Queen Marika and the Eternal City as well. We'll have to go into more detail on them later, though. But with their knives imbued with the Rune of Death, they carved a curse mark into two demigods, Ranni and Godwin. The curse mark itself is an obtainable item, and it reads, "This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod, and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, two demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into two half-wheels. Ranni was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone." So interestingly, these assassins and the knives imbued with the Rune of Death had the power to cleave life from the physical body and from the spirit as well. Specifically, Ranni was the one whose flesh perished, and she became a disembodied spirit, free from her corporeal flesh, which is what she wanted, and she now occupies a doll. But Godwin became the Prince of Death, living without a soul and spreading the Rune of Death across the lands between through Deathroot. Now, according to item descriptions, Deathroot is the Rune of Death itself, and it acts as a source that gives rise to those who live in death. Now, what I find really interesting is the fact that this Rune of Death that is embodied by Deathroot and those who live in death, it clearly has aspects of both death and life as well, which makes sense based on what you should have learned from this episode, right?
Yeah.
Because death isn't just the end, it's life as well. So it makes sense that those who live in death would have aspects of death and life.
Yeah, they just look more morbid, and that's actually it. Can't can't talk or something like that.
All contained in these beings that were brought to life, in a sense, by the rune of death. And while those who live in death are a bit unnatural because they do come from this fragmented rune of death, this half of a curse mark, they still have life in death, and so you can argue that they still have a right to life. And in fact, that's entirely what one of the endings is about, at least how I understand it. And I'll try to explore it more thoroughly later on.
Pretty
These
complicated.
beings are persecuted and hunted down by fundamentalists of the Golden Order, and whether these fundamentalists are truly serving the fundamentals of order in the first place is just a topic that is very interesting to explore. So, in conclusion, maybe it shouldn't be a sin to live in death. After all, to quote Fia, in death there is only peace, for in death there can be no sensation.
Damn.
Thank you for watching. Special thanks to
That was
Quaylark
deep.
for looking over this script.
It was truly I'm 14 and this is deep moment. And Quaylark, she always gives good information. How does she only have like 12k subs? That's nothing. Damn. Like with someone who truly puts effort into it. And you already know VaatiVidya, so you can support him. But Quaylark, you should also support her. That's good shit, man.
She has an awesome channel that you really should go and check out, and it's been great to have someone to just discuss my ideas with. But I'd also like to thank Eve, the sponsor of this video,
Sponsor!
who'd like me to talk about Spectrum, which is their high-end gaming monitor.
Go on his channel, support him on his sponsor. That's not bad. Shut the fuck up. That's not bad, man. VaatiVidya, every single video, high quality. Never complained about his content. Like, it's insane. Like, this is good shit. And if you want to see more shit like this, you want to see more reactions, then you can subscribe to me as well. Leave a like and comment, I guess. And that's actually it. Like, this was amazing. I will watch every single, or make a reaction every single VaatiVidya video when he makes one. That's the important factor. Yeah. And yeah, that's it. I guess I see you next time. Wafer out. Damn.